good morning, and thank you for joining us on the program. This is Business Morning, reaching you live from Channels Television. I'm Temple Ashaju. Let's get down to business with some news that we've got on our radar right now. An event is holding this morning, and it's actually about the economic outlook of Nigeria. The Minister of Finance, Mrs. Zainab Ahmed, alongside other executives of government under the ministry, will be meeting with the private sector players to provide insight into the federal government's revenue growth and economic development expectations for 2019. Now, the meeting, which is organized in collaboration with Deloitte, will drill down into the budget 2019 as the Director General of the Budget Office, Mr. Ben Akabweze, offers more insight into the appropriation bill. There will be 2 sessions on subnationals in line with the federal government's inclusive growth agenda, and it's expected to be presented by the Kaduna State Governor, Nasir El-Rufai, and of course a whole lot of other representatives and executives of government will be in attendance. Now the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, and other players in the commodities market have set a 7-year timeline to revive the commodities markets in the country. That's through the Nigerian Commodity Exchange, what is called the NCX in this capital markets here in the country. The plan is to be concluded in 2025, and it aims to set the exchange at par with other commodity exchanges in other parts of the world. Part of the restructuring plan includes the injection of funds by the Nigeria Sovereign Investment Authority, the NSIA, that's into the NCX, Nigeria Commodities Exchange, which has been comatose for some years now. To fast-track the plan, the Commission has established a special unit known as the Commodities Division as part of measures to strengthen regulatory capacity for the market. And this is coming at a time when the only functional and privately owned commodity exchange, FX, earned some 6.3 billion naira from the market, and that was for the exports of some 46,160 metric tons of commodities between the second quarter of 2016 and the fourth quarter of 2017. And still with the regulators, latest data from the Central Bank of Nigeria shows that the Apex Bank recorded a total foreign exchange inflow of $40.93 billion between January and September last year. The inflow represents an increase of $12.98 billion compared to the $27.95 billion recorded in preceding year. An analysis of the third quarter economic report also shows that about $14.15 billion passed through the CBN in the first quarter of last year. And in the second quarter, however, the regulator recorded an inflow of $13.82 billion, while the sum of $12.95 billion was recorded during the third quarter. Despite the decline in domestic crude oil production, there was an improvement in foreign exchange revenue from oil exports in the third quarter of 2018. And here's the news that we also need to reiterate again. The federal government has begun the tracking of every barrel of crude oil produced and exported out of the country. The surveillance program is being implemented in collaboration with the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, the EFCC. We know that the federal government, through the Ministry of Petroleum Resources, also plans to extend the tracking to the downstream sector. So, the federal government recently gave a 14-day ultimatum to international oil companies operating in Nigeria's deep offshore and inland basin, and that's to pay an outstanding revenue on the production sharing contracts, what is called the PCS. Now, the ultimatum was followed with a contract termination threat to defaulters. Now let's join Mr. Oladipo Maye, who is a partner and head of oil and gas and power at Anderson Tax, for more insight on this. Thanks a great deal for coming through in the program.
Thank you.
So let's get down to business on this particular matter. What for you are the issues that actually led to these outstandings on the part of these IOCs, and that is now necessitating quick remittance as now being pressured by the federal government?
Okay. So what has happened is that the Deep Offshore and Inland Basin Production Sharing Contracts Act has a section that stipulates that when the price of crude oil goes above $20 per barrel, that there will be a review of the benefits to the government. And we are aware that the price of crude oil went above $20 per barrel. And so a number of states went to the Supreme Court and are requesting for an additional revenue on the excess over $20 per barrel. And what the Supreme Court has said is that there should be a review. So what's interesting is that for a review for there to be a review, obviously there has to be communication with the IOCs on discussions and so on. But it appears that the federal government has just come up with a number that nobody knows how it came about.
What's this particular figure?
For one of the IOCs, the report is that it's $5 billion.
That would be Statoil.
Yes.
So it looks like we don't have enough information about what other companies are owing. But then how do you expect these companies, to be able to meet this kind of demand at this point in time that crude oil prices have really hit the floors?
It's a good question. There are other issues with the request for the $5 billion and other monies. The first issue is that in a production sharing contract, the ones that are being talked about, the owner of the concession happens to be NNPC, and the IOCs are contractors to NNPC. So when you say there's a review, it should be the owner having a meeting with his contractors. But what has happened is the federal government, through its consultant, has gone to the contractor who doesn't own the concession.
Right.
So, and then the PSCs also provide that if it happens that one party owes the other party, there will be a right of set-off. So first of all, you have to establish how much the government owes and how much the other party owes, and then you have a set-off. So the first problem is even that they've jumped the gun and gone to the contractor, who is not the concessionaire. The concessionaire in this case is NNPC on behalf of the federal government.
So what you're saying is that literally the NNPC doesn't seem to have been carried along?
I can't say for sure, but...
Because it looks like a whole lot of things about this particular issue are under wraps. But basically, let's look at the fact that there's been an ultimatum of 14 days. I think we've seen some 4 to 5 days already on this particular issue. What are your expectations from these IOCs now?
My expectation is that they would fight back, they would dig in, and they would reject it, because as far as I'm concerned, the PSC is clear that both parties have to meet to discuss. And the other thing that is that when it was time to review the terms, that was when the PIB was born. And the PIB has been around for well over 10 years. So the basis for the review was supposed to be an adjustment of the fiscal terms in the PIB, but that didn't happen. And so to then get a consultant to come up with an adjustment when the basis for the review, which is the PIB, has not been passed into law, has not been agreed by all parties, it's a bit difficult to see why anyone will agree to what is a unilateral figure.
The bottom line is these companies are actually owing.
No, what I'm saying is not that they are owing, is that the owner of the concession is NNPC through the federal government. Okay. To then go to your contractor and say you are the one owing, it's not, I'm not sure that's how it's supposed to be. The PSC then provides that if there's going to be an adjustment, because NNPC is acting on behalf of the federal government, both parties will sit down and meet. And then if NNPC is owing the IOC is owing NNPC, there will be a set-off. But this meeting hasn't held. And the basis for this adjustment, which should have been the PIB, doesn't exist. So you can't say anyone is owing.
So perhaps what will be going on now is like a dialogue backstage to see how they can then come, to a roundtable for this particular discussion, and then see how they can thrash it out. Okay, so we know that the federal government is really low on revenues and has been trying to up its game in this regard. You're a tax consultant. Of course, they've revealed recently, the Minister of Finance, Mrs. Zainab Ahmed, recently released the plan to increase VAT on some items, luxury items specifically. What do you make of this particular development?
Okay, well, value-added tax is a good source of increasing government revenue because it's more difficult to evade. You can lie about how much income you earn, but once you consume an item, once an item comes into Nigeria, it's subject to value-added tax. So I think it's a good revenue generation mechanism, especially on the luxury items, which will still be consumed. The only issue I have is there appears to be a lull in demand, a reduction in demand for a lot of goods and services. So if you then put in value-added tax on what is essentially discretionary, what is the guarantee that people are going to buy those items? So it might have even a negative consequence because being luxury, it's not a necessity. So if the price goes up again, you might then question why you are even buying it in the first place.
No, people are still buying. I guess what you're trying to say is that there's pressure on purchasing power out there.
Yes.
But then we still see that people are buying the beer because, again, the federal government the other time, hiked the duty on some of the raw materials being used for alcohol, tobacco, and co. But then if you look at the numbers of some of those companies in the market, yes, the prices may have dropped, but if you look at the cost of sale and if you look at how they've been performing, there's still a bit of sale.
Sometimes it's not as, I know people look at the profit. Sometimes it's an increased efficiency. It's not necessarily, the profit isn't always determined by increasing revenue. Sometimes it's an increase of efficiency, cutting your selling expenses, your advertising costs, your transport expenses. So overall, I'm not sure the demand for a lot of these items has gone up as much as it should. They might still be profitable, but I believe it's down to efficiency because the number of workers have not been paid salaries. And if you've not been paid salaries, it might not be the consumption of alcohol that will be your first priority.
It will be the consumption of other things. Anyways, alcohol was just an example there. But then, what then would you expect the federal government to do when they have this kind of challenge? Of course, you know that one of the key things they might want to do is to see how they can recover some of the debts, which is why we need to go back to this issue of what the IOCs are owing. So, what then would you really want them to do if you're saying these guys are not owing directly? They should speak more to the NNPC.
Good point. When you want to increase revenue, it turns out that the major factor affecting the ability of companies to invest or the IOCs to invest is actually certainty. Even if you push up the tax rate and you know how much you are going to pay, you would definitely invest. The problem we have and why revenues are going down is that there's a reduction in investments in the oil industry because you don't know what the tax rate is going to be. And you are saying now that you are going back in 2019, as far back as 2008, to make adjustments. So even in the unlikely event you collect so much, it's unlikely the person is going to invest for the future because this is 10 years or 11 years from 2008. People need to know what the tax rate is. And the PIB, so many versions have come out. Everyone studying, thinking this is going to be the PIB, but then it's adjusted again. So certainty is a very important way of providing that certainty will definitely boost revenues because people will start to invest.
So by boosting revenue, would you rather they increase that VAT on luxury items now, or they just go ahead and broaden the tax base, which is quite low?
I prefer they will broaden the tax base.
But you don't think that one of the means of broadening the tax base is by hiking the VAT?
That doesn't essentially broaden the tax base. That generates more income because you are just increasing the tax rate. VAT already has a much higher compliance level than other forms of taxes because, like I said, you make a phone call, VAT is payable. So broadening the tax base would mean you will catch those taxpayers making millions in the informal sector, billions in the informal sector. You bring them on board, they pay their taxes. Then in addition, you can increase your VAT on the luxury items, but then you have to hope that people are still willing to spend on these luxury items.
Don't you feel the system is currently saturated? Because that's the formal sector now. The informal sector is actually there. That looks untapped. What's the best strategy to adopt for that?
For the informal sector?
For the informal sector, yes.
I think there are different ways. Luckily, we have the BVN that can tell how much is in people's bank accounts. There's also evidence of the contracts a number of these guys, politicians and so on, carry out on behalf of the federal government. So it's just tightening the loophole, requesting for tax clearance certificates, deducting withholding tax at source before making payments to these politicians. That means that you've already captured, and then giving people more time to come forward and comply through programs like VIDS, and then...
Yeah, but that has actually ended, and it's...
yes, but in other countries, it lasted a lot longer and gave people more time, and then you have to make maybe one or two people scapegoats and people that didn't comply, and then give an extension so that people see that there's actually a need to comply with payment of taxes.
Mr. Oladipo Maye, thank you so much for your attention. We appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oladipo Maye is a partner and, of course, head for oil and gas with Anderson Tax. Now let's do a bit of the market review and look at how they performed yesterday from the equity side quickly down to the debt market. All-share index yesterday depreciated further by some 0.11%. Of course, equity capitalization also settled at 11.614 trillion naira. In terms of activity level, we saw volume coming in at 249.53 million units. And of course, compared to what we had the previous day, that was a bit moderate. Value was 3.12 billion naira. And of course, that comprised of a lot of the deals we saw across the banking names and of course the conglomerates, consumer goods, industrial goods yesterday. Deals yesterday was 4,018, higher than what we had on Monday. In terms of the sectoral performances, the banking names yesterday kind of made a comeback, rose some 0.10%, while the consumer goods depreciated further, and that was the only sector in the markets that's depreciated. The industrial, insurance, and oil and gas segments of the market all ended good because yesterday we saw more of buy interest. There were more. The market breadth was also really, really positive. In terms of the performance of the energy stocks, we've got increments in O&O, some good accretion there by 0.99% after we saw some 1.7 million units of shares exchanged. Total was unchanged. Eternal PLC rose some 1.16%. Seplat up 2.88%. The NASD O2C was flattish yesterday, and of course, we saw volume at 11.6 million, valued at 1.7 million naira, compared to what we had the previous day, where we saw just 250-something thousand naira value there. After the break, we will be able to drill down further into what the debt market had yesterday in terms of the bond auction of 150 billion naira. Looks like that was unsubscribed, fully subscribed to by a lot of the players in the market. Why? We'll find out more on this. Here we go.